September 11th was a beautiful day. It was just gorgeous. It started so beautifully. And I was sitting on my bed and I was playing with my cats, and I heard this roaring sound, a plane coming down. It was very clear that a plane was coming down to crash, and I was thinking maybe they're trying to dump it in the river. And it sounded like it was coming right down onto my apartment, and the roar was so loud and so strong, and it sounded like they were trying to make that plane go as fast as it could at the highest speed possible. And I ran. The cats jumped off my lap and ran to hide, and I ran from my bedroom to the living room, and by the time I got to the windows, the tower was already exploding. So I stood there, and I had heard the jet coming down. It sounded like it was coming down to my building. It actually had been coming right down my street. It was right over my building. And I saw the hole that it made when it crashed into the building, and it was a huge hole, and it was very clear that a large jet had crashed into the tower. But I was thinking that a small plane had crashed. Even seeing that, that's what I thought, and that's what shock does, because it was just the unthinkable. So anyway, I stood there. I don't know how long I stood there, and in shock. And then I know I called my mother right away, and I said, there's been an explosion at the World Trade Center. Turn on the TV. And then I went out into the hallway and down to the neighbors, and I told the woman working there, maybe you should get the children from the school. There's a school across from me. Actually, I could see the children and the parents running into the building screaming in terror when this had all occurred. So I told the nanny, maybe you better go get the children. And she told me that the father was there. And then I went back to my apartment, and I was standing there just horrified. And Donald came in. Donald lives with me, and he said, maybe you better get your camera out. So I got my camera, and I started to shoot, but I was shooting handheld telephoto, and you can't imagine what it's like to try and shoot handheld telephoto when you're in shock and you're wondering if maybe you're going to get killed. You know, you're just shaking very, very hard. You can't be steady. So I went to get the tripod, and I put it on a tripod and shot a few shots, and then while I was putting it on the tripod, I heard Donald yell, there's another one, and I tried to move the camera up to get the shot, because that's what you think when you're a camera person, is get the shot when you have the camera with you. And so I caught some of the explosion coming out, and that's when we knew it was deliberate, because before then it was maybe an accident, but this was not an accident. And so then I set the camera on a tripod and just let it on a still shot, and we talked to neighbors. I talked to my mother on the phone. Donald and I talked about dying. Were we going to be killed? We talked about, I said that I thought the buildings were so tall they would just come down upon themselves. Who knew? But so we just kind of dealt with it, and we were horrified. So anyway, at some point I decided I wanted to go up on the roof and shoot, and I took the camera up there onto the roof, and I was shooting the building, and I never felt alone up there. I was alone on the roof, but I never felt alone. I felt that all the people around me, the people that we were going through this together. And it was when I was shooting on the roof that I realized that there were people jumping from the building. There were people falling, and there were people jumping, and every single one of them was different. This wasn't just something going out the building, or every single individual. It was different with every single individual. The language of the fall, the language of the body, it expressed something different. Some were helpless, and some were terrified, and some were so defiant, like I'm if my life's ending, then I'm ending it, defiant. And but every one of them was who they were, and I couldn't film anymore after that. So I turned the camera off, and I went back downstairs, and Donald was there, and he was in shock. He was in terrible shock, and he probably should have gone to the hospital. But that day, it seemed normal for it to be in that much shock. But I made him some tea and some sugar, and then right after that, the tower fell. The first tower fell, but you couldn't tell exactly what was going on. There was so much smoke. There was dust, and all we knew was that maybe it had fallen, maybe it had been blown up, maybe the gas lines were blowing up, maybe another plane had gone in, but something really bad had happened again, and the situation was not stable. We kept thinking it was stabilized. Well, it wasn't stable. So Donald said, "We have to leave right now." So we did. We walked out. I didn't take any money. I didn't take my camera. Donald and I walked out the door. And when we hit the sidewalk in front, the street was filled with people, and they were crying, and people had their hands over the eyes of the children. And I was thinking, "Get those children out of here! What are you doing?" But they were just frozen. Everybody was frozen, staring at the towers, and they couldn't move. They were so horrified. And every time somebody else jumped, the whole crowd would cry out. And I pushed Donald as we were decided to walk to the village, and I said, "Don't look back. You cannot help them. Do not look back. You can't help them." And so we were walking, and we got a few blocks away, and we heard the sound of another jet. Well, you can imagine what that was like. Everybody started screaming. The jet was flying over. It was flying very low, very fast, and people were yelling, and we were yelling too. It's okay. It's the military. It's okay. And we just kept walking, and that's when the second tower fell, and I almost remember it, but the shock is just too hard to actually remember it. But we got a little further down, and I turned around. I felt like we got down far enough so it was quiet. And there were just some few people here and there gathered around cars listening to radios. And I turned around, and I looked, and there was nothing there. The towers were gone. It was just empty. And so we went up to the West Village, and it was very quiet there. It was peaceful. There were people all through the streets walking. There weren't really people driving, and people gathered around radios, and everyone telling everybody what was going on, and everyone talking to everyone. And it was a beautiful day, and everyone was horrified. And I left and went right back down to get my cats out. And it took me the whole rest of the day. At around 4 o'clock, Building 7 fell, and I had to run from the wall of smoke from Building 7. I was very close, but not quite there yet. I had to run from the smoke, from the dust. And then I finally got down. Building 7 fell around 4, I think 3 or 4, and I finally got down to a block away from my building across the street. It was around 6 o'clock. And I was stuck there for hours, and I kept the police would say, your cats will be fine. You really should leave. And I say, I know they're fine, but I have to stay. I have to try. And I'll stay here, and I won't cause you any trouble. But I just need to try and get my cats out. I just can't leave them. And they understood, so they let me stay. They kicked about everybody else out, but they did let me stay. And if I'd had a camera, they would have thrown me out. And if I'd been with anyone, if I hadn't been alone, they would have thrown me out. But I was alone, and so they let me stay. And it was a war. It was like a war. It was like maybe the Blitz in London had been, with completely chaotic and everybody running back and forth and everything very loud and the only difference was that we had more modern equipment and there were big spotlights, and they never would have had that during the Blitz, but they had it then, and it was, the smoke was so strong, and it was just so sad. And anyway, by about 1:30 in the morning, I got to my front door, and the door was locked, of course. But the people from McDonald's showed up from around 2, and they let me in the basement of McDonald's, and I was able to get through their basement into our basement, and then climb up the stairwell, feeling in the dark and trying to guess the floors, and I guessed wrong. And then finally I found right. But I was so frightened because I think, oh my God, if anything happens now, I can't move quickly. And so, but I got through on my floor, and I was picking up a big cat from next door, Lulu, and my 2 small kittens, and I heard Lulu cry, and I said, Lulu, it's okay, I'm here. And then she quieted down, and I got the kittens, and I got Lulu, and I got my camera, and I got my Donald's computer, and I carried them all down one by one, down the stairs, floor at a time, floor at a time, floor at a time. And I got everything down and then onto the street. And the cats were just so frightened they couldn't even cry. They were just so frightened because it was so loud. And I got them all on a carrier and managed to pile everything up and put stuff on my back. And then I pulled the carrier through the streets, all the blocks and blocks and blocks, and past all the vehicles and the sirens and this and that, and then passed through quiet, empty streets with tons of bulldozers and equipment and everything lined up along the sides, and up to the apartment where I was staying, and that was September 11th. And the only other thing I can tell you about it is that I am so grateful for the wonderful people who are around me. And if I ever have to go through it again, I want to go through it with those same people, because they were terrified and they weren't at their best, but they did what they could. And you know what? Everybody did really good that day. Everyone did pretty good, and we all got out. We got out fine. Those of us that weren't in the building that were trapped. But for the rest of us, we were able to go away, and we didn't trample, and we didn't do any harm, and we helped one another, and that's really good.